This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
It appears we have a discrepancy. This is Wretched Radio. Joey, you wouldn't have picked the same story.
We have a discrepancy?
You don't even know that you're in this discrepancy, and you're in this discrepancy.
Oh,
You were discrept by Joey, who said, I wouldn't have picked the DNA story. I would have picked which one, Joey?
I would have gone with the Karl Marx being celebrated across America story.
I'm telling you. He's going nowhere. He's making a quiet resurgence. Now, it's being gussied up. It's being repackaged with all kinds of brands, but make no mistake about it, Marxism is influencing a lot. It's a neo-Marxism, and it's also mingled with postmodernism, which is a philosophy that's the predominant worldview of our day, which we should all be acquainted with. Talk about that, by the way, on a presentation from Answers in Genesis called Says Who? The history of secular humanism in the Bible, because there's nothing new under the sun, as well as from, well, let's just call it the time of the Renaissance, which the age of the Enlightenment, the more you think about it, is a really annoying phrase. Why? Because they came out of darkness. What was dark? You know, those dark ages when the church was in charge of everything. Nothing good happened at that time. We are the enlightened ones. And smug, to boot. Karl Marx, his desire was, well, egalitarianism. Everybody has the same outcomes. No matter what you do, everybody is going to make the same amount of money, have the same amount of property, if any, and the same number of crusts of bread, which is what Marxism kind of leads. Anybody want to go to Venezuela and see if maybe we've got a test case for this whole nonsense? But what I think is also troubling about it is the godlessness of the worldview and the undermining of all things that we assume are true. And I see this happening a lot. Now, this might be a little preposterous to you in the beginning, but I think you're seeing it more than you realize, especially if you have teenagers or you deal with youth. Why? Why do we have to do it like that? Now, we've seen an undermining, big-time, radical social shifts with marriage, for instance. Because the question was, well, why does it have to be a man and a woman? Why does it have to be like that? And our answer should have been because God said so. Unfortunately, our answer was, well, it's not going to be good for the kids. Well, it's not God's best. Instead of, thus saith the Lord. By the way, speaking of that, I'll get back to the pajama article, which we haven't gotten to yet. Here it is right here. This is from the Ruth Institute. This is Jennifer Morse Reebok, or is it Reebok Morse? She's Roman Catholic, and she's I think a decent social critic. She wrote, the subtitle is Laissez-faire Parenting, that it's the hands-off parenting and its effects. She was the first one who accumulated statistics on the effects of daycare on both children and mommies. There's far more out there. It's not spoken of very much these days. Now she's at the Ruth Institute, which I believe she started. In recent years, she writes at this article. Who wrote this? I don't know. Stephen Crayson wrote this. In recent years, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, that upwards of 80% of reports of child abuse and neglect are unfounded. Okay, that's just a side note that we've got to be careful when we respond to these accusations. We don't want to go, no, it didn't happen. On the other hand, we've got to be aware, 80% of the time false, so proceed with caution and wisdom. It is interesting that while self-styled child advocates, their academic allies, and the sprawling child protective system are so ready to find child maltreatment inside almost everyone's family front door. But they're silent about the harms to children from being brought up by same-sex couples. Now, I just said we should not have been arguing this way, and we shouldn't have. We shouldn't be. The statistic war, the sociological study card. You play it, somebody will slap down another one, or they'll say that your card is deficient, as they did with Dr. Mark Regnerus, University of Texas sociologist. Several years ago, I remember we reported this, and he was careful to to avoid sweeping accusations. Nevertheless, children reared in homes headed by same-sex parents were more likely to have poor educational attainment, cohabitate when they became adults. Not that progressives care about that. Be sexually molested, have sexually transmitted diseases, smoke tobacco and marijuana. Not that the progressives have a problem with that anymore either. Be on public assistance as adults. Not that progressives have a problem with that either. Be in mental health counseling or therapy and suffer from depression and get into trouble with the law. Another sociologist, Paul Sullins, Ph.D., emeritus professor at the Catholic University of America. He did similar research, and he discovered basically the same thing. Comparison to children with opposite-sex parents, children in the care of same-sex couples were almost twice as likely to have a developmental disability, almost twice as likely to have had medical treatment for an emotional problem, and 3 times as likely to have had medicine prescribed for a psychological condition in the past year. 10 times more likely to have been sexually touched by a parent or other adult, and 4 times more likely to have been forced to have sex against their will. I think that's called rape. Maybe that's not the in term anymore, men. Less likely when reaching adolescence to have romantic relationships or to see themselves in future relationships involving pregnancy or marriage. Twice as likely to suffer from depression. 4 times as likely to consider suicide. More likely to use tobacco and marijuana. And to have been arrested and then pled guilty of a crime. 3 times more likely to be unemployed, receiving public assistance, or later married to have adulterous relationships. There's more studies, but I do believe we get the point. Is this our argument? No. As a Christian, we know that we knew this was inevitable. I mean, why? But why? Because God said so. You go outside of God's parameters, even when pagans act outside of God's parameters. This is why nations that aren't Christian in any stretch, they recognize marriage is really important. Family is the fiber of society that holds everything together. Otherwise, it unravels faster than the Shroud of Turin. Marriage is a good thing because it's a God thing. Even when pagans do it, it is a good thing. And we were told, no problems, it's all going to be good. And we responded and should have said something completely different. We said, no, it's going to be bad for the kids. Well, of course it turned out to be that way, but we should have been saying, thus saith the Lord. Why? Because that entire effort was about deconstructionism. Deconstructing what we know to be true. And I'm going to share with you an example of deconstructionism. Headline from Fox News. A movie theater in New Zealand forced to issue dress code after customers keep showing up in pajamas and bathrobes. I was just in an airport and noticed there's a lot of people wearing their jams in the airport. Now, I get you missed your flight, you got to sleep over, you don't have to unpack your bags and put on your pajamas. If that were the case, okay, a little weird, but whatever. But that's not the case. People are traveling in pajamas. Now, think about the history of airline attire. People used to get dressed up to board an airplane. I remember this. My first blue blazer was purchased because I was going to fly an airplane when I was 19. First time. Maybe 20. I got my own. I had to have a blue blazer. You can't go on an airplane without a blue blazer, said my mother. Now they're wearing jammas on the airplane ride. Why? Deconstructionism. The management noticed an increasing trend in people wearing pajamas, onesies, and bathrobes to the establishment. So they had to put out a message that said, sorry, you can't come unless you dress what? Appropriately. Deconstructionism says, what's inappropriate about pajamas? Why do those pieces of fabric need to be designated for a particular use behind closed doors in your bedroom? Well, why? Why can't I wear my bathrobe out here? Don't call it a bathrobe. Just call it a robe. And I can wear it anywhere. It's deconstructionism, and it's happening everywhere. It's clothing. It's marriage. I think tiny house business is a part of this. No, why do we have to have a bigger house and take care of the land? I want to have fun. It's deconstruction. We're supposed to subdue the earth. They are deconstructing everything. So start asking. You're going to get these questions. This is going to cause us to be sharpened up. Your kids are going to say, why? Why can't I get my nose pierced? Why can't I put a spike through my head? No, some of these things, we've talked about them in the past. You get my point? You better have an answer if you've got an objection to it. You better be able to explain, this is what God says. This is why we have appropriate attire for appropriate events, because we see it demonstrated and modeled in the Bible, and that clothing plays a role. And that clothing speaks. And by the way, no clothing speaks too. No clothing in public is a fist shake against God. We're not fallen. There's no effects of sin. I'm going to parade this around because I have no shame. Clothing speaks. It says something. And our culture today says who? Well, why does it have to be that way? And they are asking that about everything because there is a goal, and it's not Marxism. It is to undermine the Christian faith, where God says over 700 times, "Thus saith the Lord." This is Wretched Radio. Thank you very much for watching one segment. You can listen to 3 more, well, if you can stomach it, for free at wretched.org, iTunes, Android, whatever your listening device is. If you have a plate in your head, you can pick up the program from anywhere around the world, thanks to the ongoing monthly support of our gospel partners. Should you be one of the people who has listened to the program for an extended period of time, meaning more than once, would you please consider becoming a gospel partner so we can continue to proclaim the good news of the gospel? Simply visit wretched.org.